Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 56 of the Future of Work show, where for the past 3 years, we've been discussing mega trends that are shifting the way we work and the way we build organizations. Now, if you've been following us, you know that we've had leading academics, leading thought leaders, practitioners from all across the world come in and join us on this show to speak about some of the ideas that they are working with. And in today's episode, I have with me Aaron Hurst, who is the author of the bestseller, The Purpose Economy, and also a serial entrepreneur who's worked with purpose in many different ways. And he's going to join me in conversation around what it means to work with purpose. Some of you might have been following our posts, and you know that so much of what we've been writing in the last few weeks has been around what it means to build the next stage of our career, the second, third, or perhaps even fourth stage of our career. And what we're going to try and dive deep into is what does it mean now to build a career with purpose as a central pillar to it? So with that, let me bring on Aaron. Hi, Aaron.
Hi, wonderful to be here with you.
I'm so happy you could make it, and it's early morning for you. So extra thank you for joining me.
My pleasure.
So, Aaron, I've loved to read the work you've done. I've watched several of your interviews as well. I'm just so intrigued by this idea that the next economy that we're walking into is going to be built around purpose. And you've spoken about the many different pillars of economy that have been important in the past, and how you see purpose as becoming the next pillar that's going to drive careers and the economy. Can you share a little bit with our listeners around why you think that's the case?
Yeah, no, happy to. And I wrote The Purpose Economy about 10 years ago, so it's really interesting to see just how it's evolved even since then. But yeah, to your point, if you look at sort of economic history, we started off sort of as nomads without a sort of formal economy, and then we had an agrarian economy where we started using the land to be able to settle, start to build, towns and cities. And then we moved into an industrial economy. We started actually becoming global. We started using natural resources, being able to produce our own energy, radically changed sort of the way in which economic value is created. The agrarian activity didn't stop. It's not like we stopped eating, but we added this sort of industrial economy, which became the dominant source of innovation. And then my uncle in 1978, was an economist at Stanford University in California. And he coined the term information economy for the third economy in global history, one in which we went from like food to materials to information as sort of the thing that we were focused on processing and creating value around. And as I was at my last few years at the Taproot Foundation, building a global movement around purpose, one of the things that I was really fortunate to see was I was working with the heads of companies, governments, NGOs, really looking at what the trends were, looking at where the quest for change was happening. And it really struck me that, as we were looking at what we needed as human beings, we needed the food, we needed that sort of stability that the industrial economy brought, we needed the ability to share information. But then we had this desire for meaning. We were getting to a point where we were seeing that the world was changing around us and we needed to be part of a positive solution. We were also seeing, and not everyone, but for those especially that had the ability to, that they had a desire to really focus on their psychological needs. And I think in a lot of ways, when we think about a purpose economy, it's really a psychology economy. It's an economy in which the desire for wellness and well-being became sort of a source of innovation. And you see that in a lot of different places. You see it in the workplace, I think first and foremost, where you saw a real shift in how management thought about employees and what employees were demanding in the workplace. You saw it in the consumer behavior around what people were buying, what services they were doing. You saw it in social media around how people were trying to project their identity into the world. And then you saw it in innovation. A lot of the innovation over the last 10 years has been using technology, because it's not like information goes away, just like food doesn't go away. But if you look at a lot of the innovation, it's about giving people a more autonomy. It's about people being able to do work that is more meaningful to them. It is about the ability to focus on your well-being and your wellness, to be able to have experiences. So a lot of the innovation as well, as I talk to companies, is about that. And that's why we saw, I think since my book came out, and I really helped focus energy on this idea of purpose. I mean, you can't, I don't know what it's like in India, but in the US, like you can't walk in a city 2 blocks without seeing an advertisement that has the word purpose in it. It's really become sort of the core of how we think about what people are looking for. I was just watching TV last night, and it's like a big U.S. bank. Their whole tagline is "What is your purpose?" Like that's what a major bank's tagline is for their advertising campaign. And then we saw in was it 2019 the Business Roundtable, which is a group of several hundred of the top CEOs, mostly American-based, but some global, saying, what, enough with our only purpose as a company is creating shareholder value. We need to change that because that's not a sustainable model. And they said, we need to look at stakeholder value. And that includes employees, that includes our customers, it includes those in our community. So there, I think, really has been a shift in the consciousness of CEOs. And I saw that when I was doing work for Fast Company, profiling CEOs. Like there's so much desire by leadership to shift how they're working. They just needed permission and a structure to be able to create that change. That's probably a longer answer than you wanted, but there's my answer.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And if I'm honest, I know that when I started my own career, and at that time it was really common for almost all large organizations to write some version of how the purpose of my organization is to maximize shareholder value. It was the most common, right there at the reception. And I remember, as someone who was just starting out her career at the time, just finding that so uninspiring. And it would be really hard for someone who was joining in as a management trainee to care about any of that. Like, why should I care? Why should I care that, if your purpose is to maximize your shareholder value, what's that to me? So I've also seen some of these key shifts, over the last few decades. And I also find it extremely heartening. I find the fact that whether, some of it is certainly genuine, some of it is, just following the trend that, is clearly visible. But either way, whichever way, just the fact that purpose has become so central is extremely heartening. You spoke a little bit about the science of how purpose and fulfillment are connected, Aaron. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of different components to that. So I think the first place I would start, because a lot of people, when they think purpose, they have an immediate idea of what that means. And what I found is that it's usually based on myths, things that are not true about what purpose is from a scientific standpoint. So I think before you can sort of get down to sort of fulfillment, you need to understand that we're probably walking around with these major myths about what purpose is. So I'd love to just share a couple of those because I think it really sets the stage for the conversation. The first is most people believe purpose is a cause. So like when someone says what my purpose is to save dogs. My purpose is to prevent climate change. My purpose is to help, women in poverty. This tends to be how we think about what purpose is. When companies think about it, they tend to think about that question. I think what the research has shown, both the research academics have done and the research that I've done, and as well as my own experience, is that purpose is not about a cause. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But what I saw was that when I was working at the Taproot Foundation, we found people who would go and work, give up their corporate job, go work for a cause, and come back and say, I'm not any more fulfilled than I was in my corporate job. I just get paid less money. We see it in the data where we found that people working in the nonprofit sector, NGOs, healthcare, even education, the majority of them are unfulfilled at work. So this idea that like it's tied to a cause is really problematic because it also creates a fixed mindset where you think I can only get purpose when I'm working towards that cause. And if that cause goes away, and tied to that, I think one of the most problematic framings that I've seen, especially with young people, is this idea of a calling. A calling, I am called to be a doctor. I am called to be whatever that, fill in the blank, whatever that is, right? And what that is a fixed mindset applied to purpose. And it's problematic because if you think about it, if you have a calling, like let's say to be a doctor, when you retire, that means you're not allowed to have purpose anymore. That doesn't make sense. If you lose your license to be a doctor, do you then no longer get to have purpose in your life? It's a sort of frame that I can only get it through one thing. So one of the really important things to know is like a genuine purpose and frame of purpose should allow you to get purpose from any job. Certain jobs may be better for it than others, but you shouldn't have this idea there's purpose jobs and non-purpose jobs. We've found people deeply fulfilled in every single profession we've studied. And we've found people unfulfilled in every profession that we have studied. And I think at the core of that, that's because when you think about what purpose is, it's about creating meaning. It's like whether the job is meaningful. And, I often ask people when I do keynotes, like, somebody give me an example of what a meaningful job is. People are like, doctor, teacher. I'm like, there is no meaningful job. It does not exist. We human beings create meaning. It's a mental process called reflection. When we reflect, we create meaning out of something. When we don't reflect, no matter what we're doing, it has no purpose and no meaning because we're not creating that meaning and attaching it to it. And that what we have to really understand about purpose and fulfillment and meaning is it's all about the process of reflection and storing experiences and giving them meaning. And this is why, I talk to people all the time that have what you would think would be very purposeful, meaningful jobs, but they're deeply unfulfilled. And a lot of that's because they never have a minute to think about and reflect on what they're doing. So this is so prevalent in our society now. We do not allow for quiet time. We do not allow for reflection. We're just go, 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 go. And that's the main reason why we're seeing this huge challenge with purpose in the workplace is because we don't create space. We don't create processes to actually process what we're doing to create meaning out of it. Does that make sense?
Wow, Aaron, I love that. I love that. So I'm just going to come back to you. You've said 2-3 really important things, and I want to make sure that our listeners don't miss any of it. I think the first idea that there's meaning in jobs everywhere, and lack of it in jobs everywhere, and because you're working for, say, an organization with a clear cause, whether it's an NGO or an impact-based organization, does not necessarily translate into every individual finding meaning, which, by the way, I've found myself in some of the work I've done with, impact-focused organizations. And I had chalked it down to the fact that sometimes NGOs aren't actually as well managed, sometimes, as, the big sort of organizations which put a lot of time and effort into better leadership practices, better cultural practices. And I've often thought that the not-for-profit sector sort of misses out on that kind of, concerted focus.
That's largely a scale issue, I think. But yes.
Yeah, I think there's almost the assumption that the cause itself is so motivating that, it'll take care of, the corporate jobs need it because after all, you're just selling whatever sugared water or soap or something like that. But here you're doing something so meaningful. So, but I personally experienced that. I think it's fascinating that you also spoke about calling and, purpose being, different. In fact, I'm going to ask you a little bit about this a little later, because there are people who become quite clear about what they want to do fairly early on in their careers as well. And then there are others for whom this emerges, later. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about, what is the process by which people arrive at this purpose? Like you said, it doesn't necessarily just fall into your lap, but at some point, for some people, a connection seems to emerge. And I know in many of your talks, you've spoken about things like working for a goal that's bigger than just yourself, or positive relationships, factors like these, helping people build a sense of purpose. I do find it fascinating that you speak about how the lack of quiet time impacts a sense of purpose, though. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because you're absolutely right. I think over the last few decades, quiet time is almost vanishing.
Yes.
And if you speak to people, young people in very successful organizations today with great careers, and I know a few because my daughter's also one of them, it's true that from the moment they enter office to, I think, till the time they're fast asleep at night, pretty late, I don't think they have a moment to themselves. Yeah. So what is this relationship between quiet time, how does that work? How does that give you fulfillment?
No, it is epidemic level. I think the degree to which we just fill our lives with noise, like whether it's social media, people have headphones on, like even commuting to work, people are listening to something. There isn't that sort of just pure quiet time, which we know is key to our mental health, just to have that quiet just like sleep is. But it literally is, it's the act of reflection. So when you do something, like we're doing this conversation right now, if we don't stop and reflect on, was that a meaningful conversation at the end, per se, even for 5, 15, 30 seconds, it doesn't register in our brain as having been meaningful. Because we didn't reflect and actually store it. So if you think about your brain as like a database, a lot of stuff just goes straight in and out because you never gave it a location or a place to store it. And what meaning is,
that's fascinating. That's fascinating. And so do you think that quiet time plays a role in figuring out your purpose as well?
Well, self-awareness, which is at the core of finding out what your purpose is about reflection. You can't do that without quiet time to actually process what you've seen and what you've experienced. And I think that's like another one of the myths is that purpose gets revealed to you as a revelation, like you're waiting for it to strike you like lightning. And again, like it's this illusion that it's going to happen to you, and it's not. You don't have to actually do the hard work of quiet reflection to really figure out who you are. And if you look at like the history of religions of every single tradition of religion builds in quiet time. Because quiet time is the time in which you connect, one of the ways in which you connect to whatever the God or deity is that you believe in. That's that experience. And it's about also being part of something bigger than yourself. Like there's a reason why religions are designed the way they are.
Yeah. So I've had a few recent guests on this show who've made very sharp career transitions. And, they've spoken about the importance of taking some time off and really thinking about what matters to them, and therefore discovering, through that process of reflection, discovering what is it that, for lack of a better word, they are interested in doing next. Or I felt like saying call to do next. So since you did that distinction with calling, I said, okay, at least what they've chosen to do next. And when I think back to my own time when I decided that organizational behavior is going to be what I'm going to focus on, that was actually 30 years ago. And I remember that it may not have been one moment, but it was pretty much one semester when I decided that. And I do remember a lot of those ideas came while sitting in the library, reading different business magazines and saying, okay, a lot of this doesn't interest me at all. And, this is super interesting. This would be an area I'd love to work in. So that's really, really interesting. Aaron, what do you say to people who are, say in their 40s, looking at a second or third career and don't know how to get started with understanding how to create purpose in life? What process would you recommend?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, which we didn't really touch on, you sort of alluded to it, looking at what the sources of meaning typically are for people. So it's relationships. We need meaningful relationships. We need to feel like we're making an impact. We're doing something greater than ourselves. And we need to feel like we're growing. So a lot of the work I think anyone needs to do to find the work that's going to be most fulfilling to them is to really think about what kinds of relationships do I want with what kinds of people? What kinds of impact have traditionally been meaningful to me? And it could be simple things like I just like helping people smile at work. It doesn't have to be something grand. It can be something small. What kind of problems do I like solving? And then how do I want to grow? And grow does not mean reading books. Grow means stretching you out of your comfort zone, getting you into areas that scare you, where you have some fear, that actually makes you grow as a person because you see that you're capable of more than what you thought you were capable of. So for someone who's looking at a career transition, I would really just first pause and reflect on what are the relationships that I really want to have. There's many times when I've had opportunities, I'm like, I don't want to have those kinds of, those aren't the people I want to hang out with. They're lovely people. That's not the crew that I want to hang out with. What is the impact? And again, I would think about impact in terms of what kinds of problems do you want to solve? And what skills do you want to apply to solving those problems? It doesn't have to be something fancier than that. And then growth, it's like, what are the things that everyone knows this intuitively, even if they won't say it out loud? What are the fears that you know are irrational that you hold that hold you back from actually fully realizing your full self? What are those fears? And how can you create opportunities to push yourself into those fears? If you do those things, you're going to end up with a really powerful next step for what you're looking for. And it's also when you're looking for a job in this next realm, if you're able to say, not like I'm looking for an accounting level 3 job, like that's not compelling. If you say, I'm looking to work with people who are 10 feet tall and have stripes on them, I want to be able to solve problems that are about, how to alphabetize things. And I want to get over my fear of public speaking. Therefore, I think this job is the right one. Like someone's going to hire you in a second because they see that there's an actual thoughtfulness and an alignment around what you are saying. So that's sort of the first sort of area of thought that I would focus on. And then I would just underscore relationships. I would start thinking about who are the people that you know that you really just get energy from. And go and talk to them about what you're looking for. Because people who create energy know other people who create energy, and they're the right people to be talking to. Instead of focusing on like talking to people of a certain industry or a certain area, we found in our research that often the jobs you think you wouldn't like, you often just haven't heard about them from somebody who's similar to you. And when you actually talk to someone similar to that job, you have a very different perception of what that job is. So it's like keeping that open mind about what's possible by talking to a lot of people that are similar to you in different places.
Love that idea, Aaron. I love that idea because it's absolutely true. I think there's almost no role which can't be experienced extremely differently by different kinds of people.
Yep.
So, having the opportunity to see what others like you find exciting, how do they get energy? It's such a fascinating way to look at this. I also really like what you said about the growth and fears part. How am I going to challenge myself? How do I want to grow? What are my fears? What do I want to overcome? That's just such a nice way of looking at it. What are your thoughts around whether purpose is like, is it one purpose for your entire career, or do you feel that purpose itself shifts through different maybe different phases of our career?
So I think when you think about questions like this, you have to really remember that we're biological creatures, and you have to think about, if you believe in purpose, if you believe in meaning, your purpose has to have worked 2,000 years ago, and it would need to work 2,000 years in the future, because otherwise it's just a human-made construct. It's not actually real. So you have to sort of start with this sort of understanding that it has to be something that is timeless and is universal. So, for example, someone who might say they have a calling to be a doctor, maybe actually what their purpose is, they want to heal people. And that's like what matters, right? And 2,000 years ago, there were healers, and 2,000 years from now, hopefully there'll be healers. It doesn't mean you have to be a doctor. There's a lot of ways of being a healer, for example. And I don't think that those things generally change. I think what I've experienced is people start off often based on the expectations of what their parents want, what society wants, a movie they watched, their perception of something, what their friends are doing, and they sort of go down a path, and they sort of slowly start. They think it's their purpose, they think it's their calling, but as they actually start to reflect on the experience, they start to get more self-awareness, and they say, "Oh, my purpose has changed." And you're like, "No, actually, you were just carrying around other people's purpose. What you're doing is you're actually getting closer to finding your purpose." Because most of us carry around other people's, the perception it's ours, but it's actually other people's purpose.
I absolutely love that, Aaron, because it's true that I think for most people, when we're starting out our careers, we neither know ourselves enough, nor perhaps do we have even the courage, very often to, independently figure this out. And I'm not even sure it's possible to just figure it all out all at once. So the fact that, very often when most of us are starting out, it is things like we need to earn some money to have financial independence and run our own household, or we'd love to have a career that our parents would feel proud of. I mean, they've spent whatever they've spent sending us to college and so much effort. And a lot of those factors are the ones that, are important to us. at the start of it. So
Sure.
I love your description of how this evolves over time. Do you find in your own work any correlation between age, gender, and the extent to which people are driven by purpose?
Before I answer that, one thing I just want to say based on what you shared, we found almost no correlation between level of fulfillment and income. I think one of the main myths around purpose is that you need a certain amount of money before you can worry about it. And we've seen, and I think we've all seen people who have very little money, who are barely surviving, but who are really fulfilled and have a very rich life. And we've all seen wealthy corporate executives who are miserable human beings, right? So I think it's what the research actually shows is that when you have fulfillment, you're actually more likely to be successful instead of this idea of like focus on money and then later on focus on purpose. That's actually not biologically the way we work, and it's not what the data shows. So anyway, I just like to share that because a lot of people think purpose is for rich people, purpose is for later in your career. And I think that really is an excuse not to deal with it. And it's also an excuse for executive leadership to say, these are purpose jobs. And then we have jobs for people who just need money to survive and they don't need purpose. And that totally dehumanizes people. And it's just not true. So I just wanted to share that, just given that you brought up money. So if you look at human development, the time in which we see sort of a big spike in people's fulfillment or their mindset really starts to happen when they enter that sort of 50, 55 plus age is where you see sort of a significant increase. The level of fulfillment from like teenager until about 50 is pretty stable for most people. What happens is you see this jump in the 50s, because from a human developmental stage, it becomes the age of reflection, I'll call it, where you start to actually reflect. It's often the age where your kids have started to leave the house. You're starting to, you had your like core career, and you realize like what actually matters at this point. What matters to me? Who am I? I have left. You realize that life is not infinite. Like, what do I actually want to spend time on? What are the things that actually bring me joy? And you build that wisdom. And that's the other way people talk about it. It's like the age of wisdom, right? The wisdom comes from reflection and also letting go of other people's expectations of you. So you see that sort of increase there. And then what we found is that women are 50% more likely to have a purpose, what we call a purpose mindset, than men are. And that what's interesting is that the people who have a purpose mindset outperform their peers in every single thing we've measured. We found that whether it was, job performance, fulfillment, tenure, their being brand ambassadors, having a purpose mindset was the key sort of differentiator, and that women are 50% more likely to have that mindset than men do. So, one of the things I always joke is like, if you just have two candidates, you know nothing else about them, always hire the woman over 50, because statistically, that's your best bet.
Wow. That's so fascinating. And as a woman over 50, very heartening as well. Aaron, where does this come from? The fact that you found women are 50% more likely to be purpose-oriented. Where do you think that comes from?
I think you just have to go to stereotypes. I don't have research to show what that is. I think what I've experienced personally is that we have cultural norms, whether it's biological or cultural, in which women tend to be socialized to focus more on relationships. They tend to be socialized to focus more on caring about other people. They tend to be focused on worrying about the community more. And they're also, I think, socialized to reflect and be more thoughtful in a lot of ways than men are. Men are often designed to do, and women are more designed to like be. And that frame of mind is actually a healthier one in sort of our overall the way we're wired. So that's sort of how I generalize it. It's always dangerous to talk about things like gender because there's an exception for every rule, and it's hard to know the exact origins for it. We do know that we found in a research study done out of the University of Michigan that people who have a good relationship with their mother are more likely to have a purpose mindset. And in fact, It's only when you have a father who has a negative influence that you see that the only influence that father can have on mindset is really basically is negative. So the best thing they can do is just sort of stay out of the way on this front. They tend to have a more negative influence on their kids when it comes to mindset.
I found this fascinating too. I know you spoke about this, I think, in your talk at Google.
Yeah.
And I immediately sent it to my daughter, by the way, and son. And I said, okay, so, kids with a good relationship with their mothers are likely to think about work as being more than just earning money. Because I think that's how you stated that there. And of course, they immediately asked me, what's the science behind this? So I said, I'm going to find out. I'm going to tell you what the science is.
I wrote an article about it in the Washington Post. So if people are looking for more on it and sort of the research, it's in the Washington Post. I actually posted on Mother's Day like 9 years ago. So you can look for it and find it there.
No, they're just fascinating. So I'll tell you, Aaron, in fact, we'd done some research a few years ago tracking careers of women business graduates and how they felt their own experiences were, where they thought they were similar to their, the men in their batch, and where they thought that their careers moved a little differently. And one of the things that we discovered was that over time, because women right from the start had so many competing responsibilities and far more challenges, quite honestly, at the workplace. So for women, it meant recommitting almost every day to work,
which is an
and
active.
it's an active approach, right? So every morning, is this really worth it for me? Is this really worth it? Do I really want to do this? And I'm going to be leaving, there's some examples are really obvious. I'm going to leave my baby behind and whatever. I'm not going to go for this important event. So is this really worth it? And it's an answer it's a question I'm going to ask myself, a lot, again and again and again and again. The question just doesn't go away. Later, it might be connected with, experiencing my family needs me in other ways. My parents need me. So there's this whole question about, is this something I really want to spend my time doing? And we also found that for women, again, not generalizing, because obviously there are women and there are women and there are women, and we're all different, just as all men are different. But there were many women for whom just say a title and a salary bracket was not enough to make up for the many other things they felt they were going to have to give up to pursue their career. So I can understand why, if you have to sort of ask yourself this question pretty much every morning, why am I doing this? Is this really worth my while if I'm giving up A, B, C, which also matters a lot to me? And like you said, that people who have a purpose are the ones who eventually, do better. I've also found the same thing, particularly true for women, actually, because otherwise, at some point, the purpose question doesn't get answered as a strong positive, right? It's like, it's not worth it. So I want to do something else. This is not worth it,
Yeah. Well, no, I think I love that because it's a perfect example of, like, I think men are socialized work. Like, they're very clear, like, your job is to work, work, work. With women, there's a choice, to your point, often, not always, but often. And what it's doing is it's forcing that reflection on a daily basis, which causes you then to store, is my job meaningful enough? Whereas men may not be asking that question. So then they're not actually making the meaning. So that simple act of reflecting on, should I go to work today, is an act of meaning making. So I just think that's super powerful. And we also found, when I was doing work with MetLife, the insurance company, doing work with female leaders, we found a lot of women were uncomfortable advocating for themselves. But when they discovered their purpose and they're advocating for their purpose, they suddenly felt very empowered. So it wasn't about ego, it was about desired impact. So it's also interesting how this clarity of purpose seems to also be an empowering
Yeah.
force for women as well. So super interesting.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. In fact, I think that the evidence of that is fairly consistent, that while women aren't as good negotiators for themselves, but they're actually very good negotiators when they're negotiating on behalf of
Something.
somebody else, a community, a family, whatever. So, that's the purpose in play in all of this.
Yeah, and
So
when you can figure out when someone's actual purpose themselves, they are advocating for themselves. So they're actually meeting that need, but you're also doing it for a reason. Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting.
So, Aaron, I realize we're almost on time. Just before we close, if you could share a little bit about, two pieces of advice for someone who is considering a career transition and wants to build the next chapter of their career with a stronger connection to purpose for themselves, but don't know what to do.
Yeah, two simple things. One is just create at least 5 minutes a day for reflection. It could be writing in a journal. It could just be sitting and meditating, but just finding 5 minutes a minimum a day just for reflection will do a lot for you. I think the second is I talk about daily purpose dots. So what a dot is do one thing. And I think a lot of times we try to do something big, but if you just every morning commit to do a daily purpose dot, to do one thing that you know is fulfilling for you. It could be connecting with an old friend. It could be challenging yourself to do something you're uncomfortable with. But if you just do one thing every day, you start to build the habit of purpose creation. And when you start doing that, it'll lead you towards the insights you need to figure out where you should go. And it'll put you in a position to be interacting with the people you need to be interacting with. So creating that space for reflection and then just doing one thing every day. Don't worry about trying to solve the big problem. Try to focus on just the daily need for just one thing.
I love that, Aaron. Creating quiet time, doing one thing every day that brings purpose, and that whole cycle then strengthening your awareness of, where your purpose might lie. Thank you so much.
Purpose is inside you. It's not something outside. So unless you spend that time,
you're
not going to get there. So.
Thank you so much, Aaron. That was so helpful. I'm sure many of our listeners will go back with so many ideas around what purpose might mean for them at this point in their careers, whether they're working for a larger organization or whether they're thinking of becoming a entrepreneur, solopreneur, author. I mean, the choices today are endless. So thank you so much. I think that's really, really helpful. Appreciate it. And I will share with you any questions that our audience has that I may not have an answer to.
Yeah, no, that'd be wonderful. And also, if anybody wants to just reach out with a question, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. That's sort of my primary way of interacting with folks. So would encourage you all to connect to me on LinkedIn and let's start conversations. I really want to help spread this around the world so that we can truly build a more fulfilled society.
Oh, that's wonderful. Please check out Aaron Hurst's LinkedIn profile. I'm going to add a link to that in this LinkedIn Live. So search for that. Reach out to Aaron with any other questions or ideas that you have. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.